and justice
Justice
for all. Good evening and welcome to the special Board of Commissioners meeting for September 16th, 2013. Before we begin, I would like to announce that we had an executive session immediately prior to this meeting. All commissioners were present except for John Fisher and Kevin Higgins. We discussed matters of personnel, real estate, and litigation. Now tonight we have only one thing on the agenda, and that is a conditional use hearing for applicant 115 Strafford Avenue. This is a little different than a regular commissioners meeting. We are not sitting up here in our capacity as a legislative body tonight. We are sitting up here as a quasi-judicial body, and we will be impartially determining the conditional use application. The logistics are that our solicitor, John Rice, is going to run the hearing, and I'm going to give the floor to him, and he will explain how this is going to be run.
Okay. Just a little brief explanation of what a conditional use hearing is for the public. The board, in hearing a conditional use application, acts like a zoning hearing board does when a zoning hearing board considers a special exception. Conditional uses are permitted uses subject to additional scrutiny under the Radnor Township zoning ordinance. The conditional use that's before the board tonight is a density modification use. It's a permitted use in the zoning district, subject to the requirements of the density modification provisions, which are at 280-90 of the zoning ordinance, and then there's some general conditional use provisions at 280-134 of the zoning ordinance. The way the hearing will be run tonight is the applicant is here. Mr. Brosman's representing the applicant, 115 Strafford Avenue, LLC. I believe Mr. Caulfield is also here.
That's correct, sir.
Representing some of the neighbors.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let's do this. We know Mr. Brosman's here representing the applicant. Mr. Crawford, you're representing who?
Let me, if I might, read into the record first by preface that my clients have reached, in the context of the prior zoning hearing board proceedings, an agreement, which is a private agreement. I don't believe it's going to be part of this record. I haven't proposed to make it part of the record, nor I believe Mr. Brosman. However, I would like all of the signatories to that agreement to be recognized as parties, and I'd like to read their names into the record, if I might. I won't take any longer than I have to do that, but I would like to put that.
These are the property owners you're representing
Correct,
tonight?
Sir.
Okay.
Yes. Leslie Morgan, and I won't give addresses unless someone wants addresses. Leslie Morgan, Nishan Dersimonian, Nancy Dersimonian, Eric Schreiber, Amy Schreiber, John Sheehan, Colleen Sheehan, Lee Williams, Karen Williams, John Shane, Melanie Shane, Melissa Booker, Jesse Booker, Kimberly Donchez, that's spelled D-O-N-C-H-E-S, Gregory Donchez, Richard Metzger, spelled M-E-T-Z-G-E-R, Paula DeMoran, spelled D-E, capital M-O-R-R-A-N, John McKenzie, and Gretchen McKenzie, all of whom are nearby residents to the subject property and members of the Farm Road Windsor Avenue Association.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you intend to participate in this hearing as a party? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would ask that they be recognized as parties.
Okay. Mr. Brosman, you don't have any objection to that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I know the township is also here, the township manager, Mr. Zinkowski, Mr. Norsini, Director of Public Works, and Mr. Kachansky are all here on behalf of the township. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So Mr. Brosman's going to proceed first and present his witnesses. Those witnesses will be subject to any questions from Mr. Crawford and the board, myself, or Mr. Zinkowski. Is there anyone else here that wants to present any testimony or any evidence other than the neighbors, Mr. Brosman, and the township? Anyone else? Okay. At the end of all the testimony, and it'll all be sworn testimony, there'll be a public comment period if anyone wants to just give public comment. It's not sworn testimony, but there'll be a public comment period. Any questions? Mr. Brosman? No. You've got a quizzical look on your face. Okay? Does the board have any questions about how we're going to proceed? Okay? All right, Mr. Brosman, why don't we have all your witnesses sworn in, everyone that you're going to have testify?
I'm planning on Chuck Dobson, Andy Heinrich, and Mike Wagner. Could you all come up here?
Raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony about the case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Okay. Just, Mr. Brosman, before you start with your first witness, let me just mark one thing, and this will be a board exhibit. I'm going to mark what was filed with the township, which is the application which was received August 2nd, 2013. And I know you have your own set of exhibits. I'm going to mark this as B1.
Okay.
Board Exhibit 1, and just so it's clear, this is the conditional use application filed on behalf of 115 Strafford Avenue LLC, and attached to the application are various exhibits. Exhibit A to the application is a agreement of sale dated February 28, 2013, between Luthra 4 LLC and 115 Strafford Avenue LLC. Exhibit B to the application is the deed with a date of July 18th, 2011, between Alberto Guadagnini
Pretty close.
and Luthra 4 LLC. Exhibit C are the plans, the conditional use plans that have been filed and reviewed by some of the township professionals. And Exhibit D is the zoning hearing board decision with, on the application, and looking for the date of that, August 1st, 2013. So that'll all be collectively just marked as Exhibit B1. Okay. Mr. Brosman, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Good evening. For the record, I'm George Brosman, representing 115 Strafford Avenue LLC, which is the equitable owner of the property at 115 Strafford Avenue. We're here this evening in connection with a conditional use application for that property at 115 Strafford Avenue. The conditional use is under Code Section 28029B1, which allows density modification development in the R4 residence district in which this property is located by conditional use to be granted by the Board of Commissioners. As I said earlier, I'm going to have three witnesses this evening: Chuck Dobson, who is the civil engineer for the project, Mike Wagner, who's the landscape architect, and Andy Heinrich, who is the traffic engineer. In a nutshell, the density modification conditional use will allow this property, which has sat vacant and has become a real eyesore, to be taken back to productive use for redevelopment with townhouses, which we think is an appropriate transitional use from the commercial uses that surround three sides of the property and to the single-family detached dwellings that are to the rear or to the east of the property. Mr. Rice noted when he included our application that we did receive zoning hearing board approval which granted several measures of relief to allow this redevelopment to come to this next step. The key piece of relief was that there was a variance granted from the minimum tract size required to do density modification development. And what I wanted to highlight at this time, and it's attached in what Mr. Rice submitted, that application was subject to numerous conditions. And those conditions were brought about as a result of an agreement between my client and the neighbors that Mr. Crawford represents. So the plans that we have submitted in connection with this conditional use application are in accordance with that agreement, in accordance with the conditions that the zoning hearing board imposed. The evidence, we believe, will show that the application complies with all of the applicable conditional use requirements for density modification, and that therefore the application should be approved. In addition, the Planning Commission of Radnor Township has recommended that this conditional use be approved. And I wanted to note that once the board would render a decision on the density modification conditional use application, this project still has to go through land development review and approval. So that generally we're here for the conditional use to decide, is this use going to be appropriate for the property, essentially the townhomes. That's what's allowed by density modification. And the specific details for the redevelopment, although we have them here to share with you, but the engineering details are generally reviewed at a closer detail during the land development process. I did hand up to you, and I handed to Mr. Rice as well as Mr. Kachansky, Zankowski, and Mr. Norsini, our exhibit package. It's somewhat duplicative. We had as A1 the conditional use package that John Rice admitted as B1. A2, I think Kevin may be putting this anyway, was the copy of the memo we had seen from the Planning Commission. And I'm going to have my witnesses go through the rest of these. I'm not going to go through all of the material that was presented to the zoning hearing board. It was extensive, but so I'm not going to make these official exhibits. I'm going to focus tonight on the conditional use standards, but just by way of brief introduction, if anybody had any questions, we have up here on the table the property and the surrounding zoning shown in an aerial exhibit. As I said, I'm not going to mark that, but suffice it to say that this property is the only property on Strafford Avenue between Route 30, Lancaster Avenue, and Eagle Road that is still zoned residential. It's essentially surrounded on three sides by commercial uses and commercial zoning, and it's only to the rear or to the east where it's surrounded by residential uses and residential zoning. I think you're pretty familiar with that. The client here is trying to do something pretty high-end and pretty upscale, we believe attractive. This was something we presented to the zoning hearing board and as part of our agreement with the neighbors. I have it in our package just as Exhibit A3. There's a smaller version of it there. This is the concept rendering for the type of units they're hoping to build here. And with that introduction, if there are no questions for me, I'd like to call my first witness, Chuck Dobson.
Okay.
Where do you think is best for him to stand with the cameras, and should he just stand next to me
he
here?
can certainly sit at the table, and maybe what he could do is come up, sit at the table,
Okay.
and you can stand there and ask your question.
Okay.
It might be more comfortable if he has his material in front of him.
Sure. Chuck, you've been sworn in previously. Can you describe your educational and professional background?
Yes, I'm a licensed professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from Drexel University in civil engineering, and I've been practicing civil engineering in the southeast region of Pennsylvania for approximately 20 years.
And in the package that I've handed out, and I've put a copy here, at Exhibit A4, is that a summary of your professional qualifications and experience?
Yes, it is.
And I would like to offer Chuck as an expert in civil engineering and land development.
will be accepted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chuck, drawing your attention to, just for the record, we've got a plan up here, but for the record, it is part of our conditional use application, Mr. Rice's B1, my A1. This is sheet 3 of the plan set, which was attached as Exhibit C. So it's A1, Exhibit C. We're going to be referring to the bigger copy here. But referring to this, Chuck, can you explain the existing conditions that are on the property?
Certainly. The property, as you previously mentioned, is located on the eastern side of Strafford Avenue. It contains 2.134 acres. It is located just north of the intersection of Strafford Avenue and Route 30, and sits behind an existing Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and there's a Citizens Bank to the south as well. The site is generally open. There are perimeter trees to the north, to the east, and some to the south. There is an existing building on the site that is known as the Villa Strafford Restaurant, former Villa Strafford Restaurant. That building is currently unoccupied and in a state of disrepair. There's also a very large parking area that was constructed for the purposes of the patrons to use the Villa Strafford Restaurant, and that is currently exists pretty much as it was installed. So you have a large area of impervious to the western edge of the site near Strafford Avenue, and you have a rather open and green area to the eastern portion of the property adjacent to the neighbors along Farm Lane.
And Chuck, roughly, you don't have to be exact here, but what's the rough amount of existing impervious surface on this property?
There is a little over 38,000 square feet of, I think it's 38,000, no, I'm sorry, 37,814 square feet of impervious, and that includes the access drives, the building, and the parking area that I mentioned.
Now, with that amount of impervious coverage that exists, does the property have any existing stormwater management controls or systems to handle that large amount of impervious cover?
No, it does not.
Now I want to focus on the proposed plan. At Exhibit A1C, again, were these the land development plans that were made part of the conditional use application that you prepared?
Yes, they were.
And I'm going to move this. Now for discussion purposes, did you prepare a colored version of the plan?
We did.
And that's laying here on the table.
That's correct, yes.
Now, can you just in brief summary fashion describe the elements of the proposed plan?
Certainly. The proposed plan is to construct 11 carriage homes in 4 groups of buildings. The westernmost 2 buildings will be comprised of 3 units per building, and then the easternmost group will have one building consisting of 2 units and 1 building consisting of 3 units. Access to the site will be taken along the adjacent to the northern property line, and then access to the individual unit clusters, if you will be taken via driveways that will come off heading south from that proposed driveway heading into the site. There is a large area, a large open space area to the east, which is required by the DMD requirements, and there will also be some significant landscaping, stormwater management, and also some privacy fencing and some walls, which are part and parcel to the landscaping that's proposed for the project.
Now, when you said DMD, is that short for density modification development?
Yes, it is.
And for the record, I've also placed in your exhibit package at A5 is a smaller copy of the colored plan that we have up on the table here. Chuck, I want to focus now on the specific ordinance requirements for density modification. Just a couple preliminary questions. Are the proposed townhouses permitted in the R4 residence district under the density modification provisions of the zoning ordinance?
Yes, they are.
And density modification development is permitted by conditional use?
Yes, it is.
And is land development review and approval also needed for this project?
Yes, it is.
And that would be done separately from this proceeding?
Yes, that's correct.
Now let's go into the ordinance. First, Code Section 280-91 dealing with common open space that's required for density modification development. This Section 91 requires that at least 15% of the tract area be designated as common open space. Referring to the plan, can you generally identify the location of the common open space?
Yes, I can. Looking at the illustrative plan, the large green area to the eastern portion of the site has been identified as being set aside to meet that minimum 15% requirement. It's noted that the area that we're talking about does not include any of the 25-foot buffers that run along the southern or eastern property line. So really what you have is an open space area that's used to qualify, but in reality, additional open space area to the east and to the south of that area.
And your plans, the non-colored version, so to speak, in Exhibit A1 C, do they contain the various calculations for the project?
Yes, they do.
And what do they reveal is the amount of open space that's being provided here?
Well, the qualifying open space provided on the submitted plan set is 18%, which is 3% higher than the minimum 15.
And that's not counting as required by the ordinance. That's not counting, there's a required 25-foot buffer along the residentially zoned properties.
That's correct, yes.
So that 25-foot buffer, in effect, is in addition to the 18% open space?
Effectively, yes, it is.
Now, the land that's being devoted to common open space, in your opinion, is it appropriate and in suitable condition for a common open space use?
Yes, it is.
And is it constrained by any natural constraints such as steep slopes, floodplains, or wetlands?
No, it is not.
Will the common open space be subject to recorded deed restrictions in order to preserve the area as common open space?
Yes, it will.
And in fact, when we submitted the conditional use application, we included a draft declaration of planned community for the development that provides at least an initial draft for these restrictions. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And in our exhibit package at A6, is this a copy of the draft that we submitted?
Yes, it is.
And is it your understanding that that document will ultimately need to be reviewed by the township solicitor during the land development approval process?
Yes.
Is the common open space contiguous to the development and not separated from the tract by existing roads?
It is contiguous, yes.
And it's not separated by roads?
It is not.
Do the plans confirm that there are no structures that are not related to open space use or any streets or parking areas in the open space?
Yes, the plans show the open space as required by ordinance.
I don't know if you have an estimate of this, but if you take the open space and that 25-foot buffer that we discussed, which generally runs along the rear line here, and along this south property line, what's the rough size of that buffer?
It's approximately 9,000 square feet, give or take a few square feet.
So again, that as a practical matter, since it's a buffer, that would kind of be additive to the 18% open space.
Yes, it would, practically speaking, absolutely.
Now, moving to Code Section 28092, which discusses various subjects, tract size and density. Code Section 28092A4 contains the requirement for density modification development in the R4 district. Is that right?
Yes, it does.
And did the applicant receive a variance from the zoning hearing board regarding the 5-acre minimum lot size requirement?
Yes.
Do the plans demonstrate compliance with the permitted density of 5.5 units per acre?
Yes, they do.
And those calculations are on the plan set that's part of the conditional use application?
Yes, those calculations are there.
In the R4 district, is the permitted density under density modification development actually less than what would be allowed under the conventional R4 district regulations?
Yes, it is.
And can you explain that?
Certainly, the standard R4 residential zone allows for a minimum lot size of 7,000 square foot per lot. When you compare that lot size to the tract area, you effectively can get about 6.2 units per acre, roughly 13 lots on the site. When you apply the DMD requirements, its maximum allowable density is 5.5 units per acre. In this case, it would be 11. So it's effectively 2 units less than what you could otherwise do in the standard R4.
So just as a matter of code, the density modification when it's in the R4 district isn't giving you more density, correct?
That's correct. It is not.
Now, Code Section 28092A4 requires that buildings be set back at least 40 feet from an existing street right-of-way line and 25 feet from any adjacent property line. Do the plans satisfy these requirements?
Yes, they do.
Moving on to 28093, which is entitled Use Regulations. Will the townhomes be owned under the Uniform Condominium or the Planned Community Act?
Yes, they will.
And this code provision that I cited has some various requirements for townhomes, so I'm going to run through them with you now. What is the maximum number of townhomes that we have on this plan in a single group?
The maximum shown on the submitted plan is 3 units per building.
And what's permitted under the ordinance?
And my understanding is the ordinance allows for up to 8 units to occupy a single building.
Are each of the groups of townhouses separated by at least 20 feet as required by Code Section 28093B?
Yes, they are.
Will the townhome units have at least 2 floors?
Yes, they will.
Are any of the townhouses constructed in a straight line? And do any of the wall planes of the units project or recede from the adjoining unit by at least 2 feet?
Yeah, the townhouses have been designed to specifically avoid constructing them with planar rear or front-facing units. There's been variety added to the architectural elements that allow for a minimum projection of 2 feet from unit to unit to provide that interest that's typically required.
Now, can you go through the, I'm at 28094, it kind of refers back to area and height regulations. Can you go through the plan? I think it may be on your cover sheet, which is A1, Exhibit C, Sheet 1. Can you just run down through the, the various area and bulk requirements and where this plan stands with regard to those?
Certainly. In the upper left-hand corner of the cover sheet was the table that you're referring to. And what we've done is we've compared the base R4 zoning with what the DMD, or density modification development, requires, and then provided a third column to show what is being provided. For example, the minimum lot area required under standard R4 is 7,000 square feet, as I had mentioned previously. The DMD does require 5 acres, but a variance was granted to allow the applicant to use the site area of 2.134 acres. The building area, which effectively means the amount of coverage that the buildings can occupy, is allowed to be 30% in the R4. The DMD requirements allow for up to 35%, but the site plan, as submitted, shows only 16%, so we're well below that criteria. Overall impervious coverage is allowed to be 40% maximum in the R4 district. The density modification development allows for that to be increased to 45% because it allows a bonus of 5 additional percent. And currently, as shown, we show about 40.2% impervious. And I say about because knowing we have to go through land development, there may be some minor adjustments to that, but for the purposes of tonight's presentation, this is very accurate. The front yard requires to be 30 feet, and the DMD requires 35 foot back from the curb and 40 foot back from an existing right-of-way. That applies along Strafford Avenue, and we exceed the 40 foot from the right-of-way. Side yards in the standard residential zone are required to be 12 foot minimum, and it says 30 foot aggregate, 15 abutting commercial, and that just allows for the placement of structures adjoining to various zoning districts. Similarly, we have a 25-foot buffer that's being provided around the entire site, so we exceed that as well as part of the DMD requirements. Again, the rear yard is required to be 35 foot in the standard R4. The DMD does allow that to reduce to 30, but this particular plan shows, and I'll go back to the illustrative plan, a separation, an effective rear yard from the closest building to the adjoining property line of a little over 121 feet. And building height in all, whether it's in the standard R4 or the DMD, is required to be a maximum of 35 feet.
And we're showing compliance with that requirement?
Yes, we are.
Now, I'd like to move on to 28095. This talks about natural features. It says that priority should be given to avoid disturbance to lakes, streams, and wooded slopes. Does the site have any of these natural features?
No, it does not.
And this provision talks about tree protection, among other things. Do the plans have specific means of tree protection spelled out on them?
They do. For trees to be preserved that are going to be within the limits of disturbance for construction, a tree protection fence, it will be installed, which is effectively equivalent to the drip line of any tree that it's surrounding. And the idea is to protect the tree, but also to protect the root zones of the tree from compaction or other construction activities.
And what sheet of the plan set shows the tree protection that you're showing on these plans?
The tree protection fencing will be shown on sheet 7 of the plan set, and that's the sediment and erosion control plan.
Okay. And speaking of erosion and sediment control, do the plans provide for proper erosion and sedimentation control?
They do, and it should be noted that we will also have to obtain an NPDES permit from DEP. That's a statewide mandated permit for any disturbance exceeding 1 acre.
Do the plans contain requirements calling for seeding and sodding to stabilize any open areas?
Yes, both temporary and permanent, to ensure that during construction, erosion is minimized, and after construction, erosion is eliminated.
Now, these things are, now we've brought them up here because they were mentioned in the ordinance, but these things will also be looked at in a lot greater detail during the land development process. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
280-96 talks about utilities. What is proposed for water and sanitary sewer service for this development?
The site is within a public water supply and a public sanitary sewer district, so all the units will be provided with public sewer and public water.
280-97 talks about yards. I think some of these requirements are actually less restrictive than some of the other requirements in the ordinance that we've gone over already, but suffice it to say, do the plans meet or exceed the yard requirements of 255-97?
Yes, they do.
And 280-98 has some general criteria regarding some site design ideas or concepts. Has the plan been designed to take into account the topography and natural features of the site?
It has, yes.
And in your opinion, would any prevailing winds or seasonal temperature, hours of sunlight have an adverse effect on the layout that you have here?
No, they would not have an adverse impact.
I think you touched on this before, but just to touch on it again, are there variations in the setbacks provided for any of the units that front on a public street?
Yes, there are.
In your opinion, is there adequate vehicular and pedestrian access and parking areas being provided?
Yes, there is.
And could you elaborate on what's proposed here?
Sure. The minimum parking requirement per the Township Code is 2 parking spaces per unit. It's noted that each one of these carriage homes will have a 2-car garage, so that requirement is immediately met. Additionally, there are guest parking stalls provided along the southern edge of the proposed access road, and also down on the southern portion of the lanes accessing the groups of units, effectively providing another 11 spaces for a net of 3 spaces per unit.
Okay, and One of the times we went to the Planning Commission, did we get a comment about guest parking?
We did.
And what was that?
They thought that additional guest parking should be provided. So that was really why we decided to come up with the additional 11 parking spaces as shown.
So you added guest parking in response to a comment that they had made.
Yes, we did.
And this will be addressed in more detail, I would imagine, during the land development process. But do you believe that this system of access will be generally acceptable for the use of these units and for servicing the units with the different service providers?
Yes, I do.
In addition to the spaces in the garage and the guest parking spaces that have been provided, as a practical matter, are there any other places on the site that people could park that we're not counting them as code parking spaces, but if somebody thought that what we had wasn't sufficient, are there other places that people would have to park?
There are. Effectively, and as you mentioned, they're not identified because they don't strictly comply with the parking requirements as set forth in the zoning ordinance. But the architecture of the carriage houses allow for effectively a parking area for realistically 2 spaces outside of each garage. So again, while they don't meet the general or the specific criteria in the ordinance for parking dimensions, they do create an effective additional 2 parking spaces. So with the 33 that I mentioned previously, plus the additional 2 per unit, effectively you have 55 spaces. So again, I do believe that the parking is sufficient as shown.
And what's your understanding of who will be responsible to own and maintain the common open space?
That would be the homeowners association.
Now, I want to focus a little bit on stormwater management, although I think that's probably a topic that will be covered in great detail at land development process. But I know it was part of our discussion with the neighbors and whatnot. We mentioned before about the existing impervious coverage, and you've said what the proposed impervious coverage is. It's about the same, and maybe a little more by the time we're done. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And what are you envisioning for stormwater management controls for this development?
Well, certainly we're going to reduce the volume of runoff from the site, and we're also going to be reducing the rate, both very significantly. There is designed, as shown on the submitted plans, a large subsurface storage facility located at the eastern edge of the property. Not only does this facility have the volume to control additional runoff, it also is situated in soils that have the ability to absorb a great deal of that runoff. The net effect is that because there is no stormwater controls on the site now, and there is very little, if any, increase in impervious area, the installation of that stormwater management facility will reduce the rate of runoff by almost 70% for the 100-year storm and just a little under 90% for the 2-year storm. I think that's important because most of the rainfalls that we get throughout the year are a result of the 2-year storm, but obviously we're all familiar with the 100-year storms and its effect on local areas. So as far as this site is concerned, the amount of stormwater being detained is far in exceedance of what the ordinance requires, which is typically really just making sure that the post-developed flows don't exceed what's going off prior to development.
So are you aware that there are stormwater concerns, I guess, to the east of this site, down near the Wawa?
I am, yes.
And does this property flow water in that direction?
This property does flow water in that direction, yes.
And based on what we are proposing, how could you describe the effect on that situation? Will we be making the situation any better?
We will be making this situation as best as we can, given the area that we have to work with.
So it'll be better than it is today?
Absolutely.
In your opinion, will the proposed redevelopment have any detrimental impact on surrounding properties?
No.
In your opinion, would the proposed redevelopment have any detrimental impact on the general public health, safety, and welfare of Radnor Township?
No, it won't.
That's all I have for Chuck at this time.
Let me just, before he asks some questions, just clarify a couple of things that you testified to. Okay, Mr. Dobson, the open space that's proposed here, you have the full set of plans in front of you?
I do.
Yeah, sheet 7 shows the stormwater management.
Yes.
Could you just turn to that for a minute? Okay. These are the plans that are dated August 2nd, 2013, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So the open space is the area between the units 1 through 3 and then the rear property boundary. And underneath the open space, that rectangular structure, that's underground stormwater facilities, piping and, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. How's the water going to get into that underground stormwater system?
We're just referring to that same sheet, Mr. Rice. You'll notice that there are thick dashed lines located around the southern and eastern edges of the proposed units. Those lines correlate to storm sewer. So effectively, we'll be installing inlets at strategic locations, collecting that stormwater and directing it to the subsurface facility.
Okay. Under the open space? It's
Yes, sir.
proposed. Okay. Mr. Brosman asked you about certain parts of the zoning ordinance, and the ordinance talks at 28091B, common open space shall be land which is appropriate, suitable for recreation, parks, school grounds, woodland conservation, floodplain, or other similar recreation or open space purpose. So what's the open space purpose for that, other than stormwater, which is underneath it? What's the open space? You said it was usable for an open space purpose, but how is it going to be usable for the inhabitants?
Well, it's going to be landscaped, so that'll provide some environmental benefit. Certainly, walking among the trees when they're in bloom is a pleasant thing to do. It'll be bermed so that there is an interesting characteristic to the area, so that it will be undulating somewhat to provide a sense of space and add to the overall buffering effect to the adjoining neighbors. And it's not going to be entirely landscaped, so it's quite plausible that somebody who wants to simply take a walk or walk their dog could go back in that area and simply walk among the trees. The stormwater facility will not obstruct them from doing that at all, nor will any of the inlets.
Do your plans propose planting trees on top of the stormwater system?
Not directly on top of the system, no, just around the system, generally speaking.
Is there a concern with encroachment by roots as the trees get bigger into the stormwater system?
No, the system is located fairly deep, and our landscape architect has selected a lot of those species to make sure that impact will be minimized. So
on sheet 7, the stormwater is going, as I understand it, to that upper right-hand corner. That's where it'll drain out into an inlet in that area?
that's correct. All the water goes there currently.
Okay. It currently just sheet flows there, is that?
It does sheet flow, yes,
Okay, so you're going to capture it, and then you're going to concentrate it, and you're going to pipe it to that location.
at a much reduced rate, yes, sir.
And where does that, what does that, have you analyzed that pipe that's going into it all? Have you looked at that off-site from here?
We have not done a hydraulic analysis of the pipe, although we do have survey locations of the pipe all the way down Windsor Avenue. We did that in anticipation that somebody may have some further questions about that, and we fully expected to get into that as part of our land development review.
Access. Just, you talked about the driveways and the parking areas and the parking spaces. If I'm a pedestrian, if I'm someone living here, how do I walk out to Lancaster Avenue? once this is built out?
Excuse me. There is an existing sidewalk here on Strafford Avenue, just to the south of the site. One of the comments that we'd received as part of our review by the Planning Commission was to look at the installation of additional sidewalks. So we certainly took that under consideration when the Planning Commission made the favorable recommendation for the conditional use to the board. So when I talked previously about the impervious area being pretty accurate for right now as presented on the plans, it is important to recognize that in order to address those comments, that may go up a little bit, but pedestrian access is one of the primary reasons why, because that was mentioned by your Planning Commission. So that, the idea would be to provide pedestrian access from the overflow parking spaces to any group of buildings and also out to Strafford Avenue, down to the point of connection just to the south of the site.
So you're talking about sidewalk along the road frontage of this property, along Strafford Avenue. There isn't any there now.
There is not any there now, correct?
Okay. And then along the main driveway, would there be a sidewalk along the main driveway coming into the property either? That's not shown at this point.
It is
correct?
not shown at this point, but it was discussed and requested to be looked into by the Planning Commission.
Okay, but I guess my question is, if I live in Unit 1, all the way at the back, in order to get out to Lancaster Avenue, I got to go down the main driveway, right?
Currently, as the plans show, yes, but I think at the end of the day, when we go through land development, we will have shown pedestrian access that's separate from those travelways.
Okay. And so if I'm living in Unit 3, how do I get a fire truck back there? Have
We
you looked
actually,
at
we actually did look at that. We have not submitted those plans to the township, but I did have the chance to consult with the Radnor Township Fire Department. And we had done an analysis of a 42-foot-long fire truck that would effectively enter the site, and staying on the pavement as designed, it can enter the site and take turning into either Drive A or Drive B and simply back out and leave again without having to leave the pavement surface. So we expect that will be the largest vehicle that we have to deal with from an emergency services perspective. The ambulances are going to be smaller. Any delivery truck is going to be likely a single unit delivery truck with a smaller turning radius. And I think we also discussed things like trash removal, which would be privately contracted. And in those instances, you're not talking about a standard garbage truck. You're probably talking about something that's like a stake body pickup truck, which is much smaller and can easily navigate the access ways.
So you said it's a 42-foot truck?
It is a 42-foot truck, yes, sir.
And that's what they have?
Yes, theirs is actually slightly smaller, but the actual criteria, I was supposed to have received them so we could analyze it. I just haven't received that yet. But given the amount of flexibility we have with our current analysis, I feel pretty good that we're going to be able to accommodate whatever the township uses for emergency services.
And who did you talk to at the fire company?
I don't remember his name. We had a nice conversation. It's kind of an unusual name, but
Did they look at the plans when you met with
he
them?
had not looked at the plans. I was actually asking him prior to preparing the turning analysis what he would use. He was going to give me the template that the township uses. He hadn't done that, so based on our conversation, I took another template from another municipality that was what I felt very close to what he had represented.
Chuck, was it Mr. Jimenez? Excuse me, Jimenez? Do you remember?
I apologize. No, I don't recall his name.
Mr. Brosman, we can get that information later. I know the
Sure.
board. Does the board have any questions of Mr. Dobson?
I have a few.
Start from Don and work our way this way.
So my first question is regarding the stormwater.
Yes, sir.
It looks to me from your, I'm looking at sheet 7, and it looks to me like the stormwater system is situated in the bermed area that would collect surface water. Is that correct?
Well, the contours you see on sheet 7 are actually elevated, so this berming is done to strategically kind of divert water down to these inlets and then the inlets that are located as part of the system. So for example, where water doesn't flow into an inlet that's situated close to one of the units, it would flow down this driveway and then overland before it got to the system. I try to encourage as much overland flow as I can because that allows for natural.
So for all intents and purposes, the stormwater system is located directly beneath a swale. It seems like the water, that's the low point. It's bermed on both sides in order to collect. So it will have runoff on top, and then will it collect, those are grates that will collect on either end of the...
Yes, sir.
So my concern is that this is open space that our code requires it to be for open space purposes or for recreation. I don't believe that one can recreate in a stormwater basin. And so you have the concern of giving us open space, but that open space is not suitable for recreation.
Well, if the intent was for these low areas that you mentioned to actually hold stormwater during a storm event and collect it so that it was accumulating on the ground, I might agree with you, but it's not intended to do that. The analysis that we performed shows clearly that the elevation of water in the system will not get above the grades, and therefore, these areas will be just like lawn areas.
So there'll be no standing water in the swale
That's
that is on top of the stormwater system.
correct.
Very good. The next question I have relates to the percentage. So as I understand these DMD ordinances, they're intended to provide open space or recreation space. There's a minimum amount, and there's a percentage associated with that amount.
Yes.
And that, as I would understand the benefit of this, those percentages wouldn't be the same if that amount gets smaller, meaning 15% of 1,000 acres is an entirely different piece of open space than 15% of 2 acres. So I'm troubled by the relief that you got at the zoning hearing board, yet you're using the same percentage for open space. So I would think that in order to see the benefit that these ordinances are intended to provide, that amount would have to come up from the amount identified in the DMD ordinance.
Well, I think that's, the zoning board wouldn't have given us the variance if they felt that way.
Well,
Could I have,
well, I guess the question.
I don't think it's a
Mr.
question,
Doc-
it's a-
The question is, can there be more open space put on this plan?
What we show as qualifying open space meets the objective criteria set forth in the DMD ordinance, which means that it can't be part of a buffer. It's got to be open and unobstructed and usable for recreation. The buffer areas themselves provide another 9,000 or so square feet to that. It's not counted in the percentage that you're speaking of, but practically speaking, when you're out there, you're not going to be able to know where the buffer starts and where the open space starts. There's going to be no practical delineation. So effectively, you're looking at a much larger area. I think also that the way that this community was laid out was to provide, a sense of home for the residents, but, with the walls, also a sense of privacy and almost intimacy with the vast amount of landscaping that's going to go in. So the idea is that these areas behind these houses, while they're not open space by definition of the ordinance, they act as open space because this is going to be a very inviting area, in my opinion, for somebody who chooses to walk their dog and decides they're just going to walk around the perimeter of the development. They'll be able to do that. They can get to the qualifying open space, but effectively, they're already going to be walking in open space. As far as the amount is concerned, I was limited with the site that I had to work with, and I did my best to work within the confines of the ordinance. So I don't really know what else at this point that I could have done.
very good. One other question. Earlier you indicated that in conventional R4, we could get 13 units on this site?
That's what the math says, yes,
Yes.
sir.
Did you provide an analysis for that we can see? I did.
There was an analysis provided. I don't know if that was made part of the record or not. It was mentioned at one of those.
Is that something that we can get to see?
It's not part of the record at this point. It's, I guess, something that could be put into the record.
Yeah, I don't have it here, but we could provide it. I mean, our position is, we don't have to, the ordinance is not set up. We're not required to demonstrate a certain yield. We're just making the point that, as an ordinance point of view, density modification, the ordinance isn't giving you more density in the R4 district.
Right, but I can't accept that point unless I'm
Right.
shown some expert testimony to that point.
Mr.
Well, it's
Dobson-
not an expert thing we're saying. We're just saying, if you look at the ordinance, it says for R4, 5.5 units for density modification. Under regular R4, it says 7,000 square foot lots. So that just is a density under the ordinance of 7,000 square feet is 6.2 units. That's all we're saying about it. Whether any particular plan could be done, we're not making that position. And we're
Well,
not required to do it under the ordinance.
But wait a minute, Mr. Brosman. You said that, and Mr. Dobson agreed with you that that was the case. And there is a plan that was done, so that could certainly be submitted by you into the record, right?
That could be, but I just wanted to be clear that we don't know if that plan is buildable. It was a plan that we did, and it's not part of our requirement under the ordinance. In other words, the board couldn't deny the plan, in my view, if they thought that we couldn't do that many lots under
Well,
R4.
we're not, I don't think there's no vote here tonight. It's just, I think Mr. Curley wants to verify statements that are being made about that plan. So,
We
you know.
weren't, just for the record, we weren't speaking about that plan. My questions to Chuck were just about the words in the ordinance. That we can go back and read it, but I've been very clear about this, that it's a matter of what the ordinance says.
so in other words, you're saying you don't want to submit that
No, I can submit that plan.
Okay.
I just
Well,
wanted
then-
to be clear of what that plan is and what
I-
we're saying here tonight.
I recall seeing a plan at one of the meetings. and
Right. We
it
can
sh-
submit it, but I just wanted to be clear of
Well,
what
when
it
you
is.
submit it, put that in your letter, so it'll be clear to everybody. But there was a plan, and I think it's a fair question to have that information submitted.
Sure,
And then it'll, for what it's worth.
we can do that.
Mr. Curley? Mr. Spengler, any questions?
I just want to do a little clarification of the way the open space and the stormwater management is going to coexist.
Yes.
How close to the surface is the system? How deep is it underneath the surface?
If you'll give me a moment, I'll give you that answer. Based on the routing analysis we did for this system, during a 100-year flow, which represents the maximum statistical storm that we have to analyze for the system, you're going to have a high water elevation of 384.01, okay? If you look at the contours surrounding we'll call it the northernmost inlet that's part of the system, that contour is at elevation 388. So you're going to have an effective separation between the high water elevation in that system and the grade of that inlet of approximately 4 feet.
So, I'm not sure you understand my question. So the distance between the horizontal top of that system and the soil that people walk on above
Right.
is 4 feet?
That's actually going to be about 3.5 feet, but
Okay.
the cover is 3.5 feet. The high water elevation of the system will be 4 feet.
And you had mentioned that there was going to be some special soil placed there that avoids runoff?
No, the natural soil that's there is very conducive to infiltrating runoff. So it's
Just regular soil and grass?
correct.
Okay. And from those topographic lines on the plan, it looks like it's a swale. Is there a swale now, or is that how it's going to be constructed?
The idea is that, and I'll try to use for the court reporter's benefit, where the stormwater system is shown, just to the west of that, there's going to be a slight elevation. The contours that are shown in this plan were prepared prior to the meeting with the neighbors. The neighbors made their desires that while they're in favor of berming, they don't want very high berms, they wanted lower berms. So effectively, you're going to have, on the western side of that system, the ground is going to come up approximately 2 feet, and it's going to be spread out. It's a very large, gentle kind of elevation change. You're going to have low points that coincide with the inlets that access the system, and then again, you're going to have another small berming area here to the east of that system between the infiltration system and the property line. Again, that's about 2 feet. But again, those contours are not reflected here because the agreement with the neighbors came subsequent to the submission of this plan set. So that's one of the things that we've been working through and fully expect to get into in greater detail when we get to land development.
So on this map, it looks like it's about an 8-foot difference. That's not correct?
That's correct. You're right. You're reading the contours correctly.
Okay.
It was shown to be this high in the original submission. Subsequent to discussions with the neighbors, they asked
It's
it to be
going to be
lowered.
about 2
So it will
feet.
be lowered, yes.
What happens to the water when the system gets overwhelmed?
Well, First of all, when you mean by overwhelmed, you're talking about the not 100-year
Huge
storm comes by,
storm,
but the 1,000-year
and
storm comes by. or
There's too
whatever.
much water for the system. It
Understood.
happens.
It does happen. What'll end up happening is that the natural point of overflow will remain the same, which is the inlet at the northeastern corner of the property. So if you were to get enough stormwater that it overwhelmed this system, it's going to overwhelm every other system in the township for that matter. So it will go to what its natural place is, which is the low spot at the northern corner of the property, where the inlet is now.
So you don't foresee that it would pool on the low spot on top of that system?
Well, the system is designed to dewater pretty rapidly, not even accounting for the infiltration that's going to occur in the soil. There is a positive outlet so that anything that accumulates in the system we construct will be metered out to the existing inlet. What other flows are coming to that inlet from the northern property or areas to the east, it's difficult for me to say. I haven't done that extensive an analysis on that because it's kind of not part of what we were doing.
Okay. And my last question, how close, what type of buffer around this system are you accounting for in terms of planting? How close can you plant trees to the system?
With the kind of depth that we're talking about, say 3.5 foot of cover, as far as shrubs are concerned, there's practically no limitation. You can put shrubs there and it won't be intrusive to the system at all. As far as large trees are concerned, and I'm flipping toward the landscaping plan so I can give you an idea of that.
It's 9,
Is
sheet
it
9.
Thank you, George. You can see in this illustration that we have mostly conifers, which I believe are, and I'm getting out of my realm of expertise, and the landscape architect probably should talk about this, but my experience is that the conifers aren't necessarily as deep-rooted, they're more spread-rooted, so their proximity to the system should not interfere with its location. But again, if the township has technical objections to the proximity of this planting to the system, I'm sure they're going to tell us as part of the land development review, and we'll adjust the locations accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Higgins?
Can you describe, I know at the subdivision and land development stage, you'll get into the stormwater retention system, but are you allowing for any infiltration, or is the system that, well, why don't you describe the system? Is it a series of serpentine pipes?
It's a series of 3-foot diameter pipes, 4 total, and they're connected at both ends by what we call a header, and that effectively allows all the pipes to be joined together. The pipes are also perforated, so they're going to be located in a bed of stone. That stone also has storage volume, approximately 40% voids in the stone. When we calculate the volume in the pipes and in the stone, it effectively becomes a basin. I mean, it's not an above-ground basin that you're used to seeing, but it becomes a storage area. And we're able to use that calculated volume per unit foot of elevation to run the stormwater through and detail for any given storm based on the amount of water that's going to flow off this site after everything is built. It's going to flow into this system, and we're able to calculate how high it's going to get, how much water is actually going to get absorbed into the ground, and at what rate is that water going to get metered out into the existing inlet to the northern portion of the property. So you can't see it, you won't even know it's there, but it will function as a regular basin does.
Do you have any idea of, for every cubic foot of water that goes into the system, how much will infiltrate and how much will be discharged?
I might. Let's see. Just look at this. I don't have a summary. I have a summary of the rates that are required. Typically, when we go for the NPDES permit that I spoke of earlier, we have to clearly show volumes being removed. And that the minimum required volume to be removed, and I don't mean to stray on your question, but I'm trying to explain my answer here, is that when you look at a 2-year storm, whatever falls now versus whatever falls after development, there's going to be a change in the depth of runoff. So what's going to happen is all of that change must be infiltrated into the ground. For this particular application, there really is no change, so we've kind of assumed that there is. So we've gone ahead and evaluated the quantity of runoff. And I apologize, I don't have that in summary for this hearing.
It's all right.
tonight.
I'm sure you'll get into that when.
I know I will. The other thing, too, that I want to point out is that there are infiltration rates that were field measured. We actually had somebody go out, dig a hole in the ground, and test specifically how much that soil is going to infiltrate. And what we did is we only took 50% roughly of that rate and used that to analyze the infiltration
Okay.
capacity. So there's several factors of safety, built into this design. I know when the township engineer gets into his detailed review, he's going to have questions and comments. I know that the Delaware County Conservation District, when they do their NPDES permit review, is also going to have detailed questions, and we're going to have to show very clearly that we're meeting all of the objective criteria at a minimum, and in this case, I feel that we're really exceeding them.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nagel?
I only have one point. I notice under 28091 Common Open Space D, it talks about the location of the open space, and it states in that paragraph that the open space should be within easy access and view of the dwelling units. And the appearance of this open space is it's only going to be the first 3 dwelling units that'll be able to see it.
Well, it may not be directly in view of all the other units, but in conjunction with the sidewalks that will be implemented into the plan, I do believe that there will be easy access.
Just not used to that. Mr. Dobson, just on the parking,
Yes, sir.
the plan talks about 52 parking spaces, and I understand that some of those are not, they're not identified in order to meet the zoning criteria.
Correct.
But as to the plan, the way it's laid out now, the number that, you're counting the garages as parking spaces?
Yeah, 2 parking spaces in the garage,
And then outside of the garage, how many parking spaces?
11 total off-site out of the units. There are identified 5 between roughly the first 2. There are 2 more located adjacent to Unit 1.
They're the guest parking.
Correct. And
But
then
it-
there are also guest parking stalls identified at the lower, I'll call them hammerheads or turnarounds at the lower end of the lanes. That's a total of 11.
Okay, but the parking to meet code are the parking spaces in the interior of the garage?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that meets the code requirement.
Yes, it does.
Now, right outside of the garage, it looks like there's a 16-foot square paved area. Is that where the additional parking would be, even though it's not required per code? You foresee cars parking outside of the garages also?
Practically speaking, I do, yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Mr. Norsini or Mr. Zinkowski, do you have any questions for Mr. Dobson about any of his testimony?
Yes, sir. Just a couple questions, Mr. Dobson.
Yes, sir.
In the exhibit that the conditions of the redevelopment per the agreement with the neighbors, under item 5, it says the developer shall provide stormwater management for the site excess of requirements. Can you describe what the excess requirement is that you're proposing?
Certainly. The minimum required criteria under the ordinance is that the post-developed condition cannot exceed the pre-developed condition. In this particular instance, one could possibly argue that under that strict criteria, no stormwater is required at all because there really isn't an increase in impervious surface. However, recognizing the concerns of the township and the neighbors situated to the east, we have, and this is all what was submitted as part of our land development plan set, the detailed stormwater calculations. What we've simply done is, and I don't know if it can be focused here, but this is a summary of what we did. And effectively, which shows the 2-year storm, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storm events. It shows what we calculate as the pre-development flow, what the pre-development volume is going to be. Then you have the there's obviously fringe areas that can't be captured just because topographically speaking, they just won't flow into the system, but those areas are extremely small. And then you go through a post-developed flow, and actually I think I erred. If you're looking about, as Mr. Higgins had requested, a volume reduction, this table actually shows the pre-developed volume. So for the 2-year storm, we calculated a total of 3,858 cubic feet of water to run off the site. In the post-developed condition, that's been reduced to 260 cubic feet. Going all the way up to the 100-year storm, it's 9,175 cubic feet. And for those who aren't used to thinking about stormwater in terms of cubic feet, 1 cubic foot is effectively 7.5 gallons. So it becomes pretty easy to kind of put it in context of what you're used to. But nevertheless, we have a 100-year pre-developed volume of 9,175 cubic feet and a total post-development volume of 2,582 cubic feet. So that really gives you, so from a volume perspective, it's, anywhere from, in the 100-year storm, maybe 15 to 18% of what's, or maybe a little bit more than 20% of what's going off now. And certainly in the 2-year storm, it's almost negligible. So there's a significant volume reduction. Furthermore, there's also, we have to worry about the rate of runoff, and that's where we get into the rate of runoff being significantly less. So we have, in the 2-year storm, we've taken the runoff and reduced it by 88%. In the 100-year storm, we've taken the runoff and reduced it by 69.2%. Those ratios may change slightly depending on comments received by the township engineer and also the conservation district, but I feel that these target areas that we've identified really are realistic as far as what this system can accomplish and the benefits that it can have on the local stormwater problem in the area.
The follow-up question to that to be to Mr. Brosman, would the developer be willing to commit after the construction would be done on this site that if these volumes are not generated as per that formula there, that there would be additional corrections made to meet this requirement?
And what I'd prefer to do, Mr. Zinkowski, is hold that question until land development. I'm not sure if we can answer that here tonight, but we are committed to doing a good stormwater program here, and we will work with your engineers to carry that out.
Okay.
One of the things that I can offer, and I know I wasn't questioned about this, is part of the NPDES permit requirements are that the BMPs have an acknowledgement. So the NPDES permit plan, what they call the post-construction stormwater management plan, must be recorded, and that's a state requirement. And that effectively makes the applicant for any project where an NPDES permit is required liable to ensure that the BMPs, in this case the underground system, is in fact functioning as it was designed. So there are already in place levels of legislation that kind of help to ensure that. So just for everybody's information.
And second question is, in regards to your stormwater management underground system there, I think from the staff's perspective, we look as that should not be calculated as part of open space because that is going to carry water underneath the ground there. What would be the, based on that square footage there, where could that be relocated on the site to be able to pick up that open space requirement?
Well, this is sort of, I think, the question Mr. Curley asked. What's the size of that stormwater facility underground? Just the square footage, rough estimate.
If you'll bear with me.
On a scale.
Oh, you have them? Oh, excellent. There's the attorney with the
I
scale.
mean, the footprint of that,
Yeah, 120.
This is 1 to 20, right?
Mm-hmm. So we'll call it 18 by. It's about 1,800 square feet. If let's see, it's roughly 18 feet wide by 90 feet long. So if it was 18 by 100, that would be 1,800 square feet. So it could effectively, it may be that if that was deducted, we could still meet the 15%. I just didn't do the math preparing for this testimony.
okay. So it's possible that that could be excluded from the open space calculation.
It is, and one of the things that we also could do is, this system is located very close to the buffer. We could slide the system to the east a bit so that part of it was actually located in the buffer, which doesn't count as the qualifying open space anyway. So there's probably a variety of ways that we can move this around and still have the minimum 15% be addressed as per the ordinance.
Okay.
One of the considerations, and just the last one would be, is the potential of possibly losing one of the units to make up that additional space. That's all I have.
That's probably not a question for the engineer. That might be a question for the applicant at some point, correct, Mr. Brosman?
Yeah, if that would happen, we would have to analyze our options. I mean,
Okay.
we don't agree, just for the record, we hear what you're saying. I'm gonna ask Chuck to do that calculation while the next witness is up. If he can figure out what percent we'd be to if that was excluded. We don't agree lawfully that we do need to exclude it. We believe it's underneath the area, and we don't believe it's prohibited in any event, but I'm gonna ask Chuck to do that calculation while my next witnesses are going.
Okay, Mr. Curley has another question.
Can you count the collection area, not just the square foot of the pipe itself, not just the footprint, but essentially that bermed area around it that's intended to serve as the collection area for it?
I don't, because it's not a linear element, I don't really have a way to quantify what that area is. But upon further evaluation, I think the answer is yes. I just don't know how accurate I could make it for tonight's proceedings.
Crawford? Yes. Do you have any questions?
Just a couple.
Okay.
Mr. Dobson, if you could turn to Exhibit A5, which is the rendered plan.
Yes, sir.
You're showing just behind units 1, 2, and 3, a series of 6 mature white pine trees that are shown on your existing conditions plan as well.
Yes.
And these are shown to be preserved on the plans.
They are, yes.
And particularly the southernmost adjacent to Unit 3, and to a lesser extent as you move to the north, they're in close proximity to the proposed patios, it appears.
Yes, they are.
Could you describe how protection measures will be taken to preserve those trees?
Certainly. As I indicated previously, whenever a tree is to be preserved and it's located within the limits of disturbance or the area of construction activity, fencing will be placed around that tree that coincides with the drip line of that tree. Oftentimes, that fencing will be even expanded depending on how close they need to get to the tree in question. In this particular instance, the deck or patio element that you spoke of is actually pretty much an unobtrusive element. It doesn't require exceptionally deep excavation, so I would imagine that impacts to any root zones would be minimal if there were any. The units themselves are much further away, so I don't really see any major impact to that. So the tree protection will ensure that heavy machinery does not move around those trees too closely, impacting the root zones, and doing everything we can to ensure the viability of those trees after construction.
Okay. Would Mr. Wagner have more detail on the species-specific vulnerability of these trees?
Yes, he would.
Okay, well then I'll reserve further questions to Mr. Wagner on that. That's all I have.
We moved off of the, Mr. Orsini, did you have?
I did. I just had a couple questions for Mr. Dobson. Just so I think everybody can get their arms around this. So we have a site that I believe on your stormwater calcs has 0.91 acres of impervious surface. And all of this is uncontrolled at this point.
That's correct.
So by virtue of you installing the stormwater management system according to our ordinance, there'll be great strides made in a reduction in runoff.
Yes, sir.
And my next question is this: the zoning hearing board ruling, there was a condition of exceeding regulations for the stormwater management. And so in its current state, is there a way that you can quantify how this exceeds the ordinance?
I think that's already been done by the submission of the calculations that were made part of the land development submission. Because I have summary tables as to the percentage of reduction for all the storms on the site. If during the course of land development, the township engineer wants further clarification, then we'll provide that in whatever format he needs.
I actually spoke with him today, and that was my big question was, we know you meet the ordinance.
Correct.
But do you exceed what's in our stormwater management ordinance, and is it quantifiable that we can see?
Yes.
Okay, and my next question will be, we have to determine, or I would recommend that we determine some quantity that the applicant has to exceed the regulations by. And my suggestion was that in Mr. Dobson's stormwater calculations, the site is currently, as I said, 0.91 acres impervious. And based on our stormwater ordinance, the existing ground cover is what he uses for his existing condition flows. So my request would be as a
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Correct?
That's correct.
All right, go ahead. Ask
My
the
requ-
question.
My request would be that as a condition of this, that we would ask the applicant to bring the entire site back to Good Meadow and use that as your existing condition. And I think that's something everybody can get their arms around. And we know this is tributary to an area that floods in the township. So that would be my request as a condition as part of this.
And Mr. Dobson, is that possible? And how would that change the stormwater management?
It is possible, and as far as changing the stormwater management, I don't know if that would simply increase the elevation of the water in the pipes, or if maybe we have to add another run of pipe. I'm not sure what the impact of that's going to be. I do want to say that from a volume standpoint, all of the impervious cover that's here, we only were able to take credit for 80% of that in the pre-developed condition. So there's already some of that factor of safety built in, but as far as a wholesale analysis from the township's perspective, I can complete any analysis that's required. I don't know what the impact of that's going to be, but I'm not exactly sure. Typically, I take my directions from my client, and if that's something that he's willing to do, then I'll do whatever he asks.
Okay. Any more questions, Mr. Nursi?
Yes, sir, I do.
You do?
Mr.
Okay.
Dobson, you said that you had taken elevations of the inverts of the existing storm sewer in Windsor Avenue?
Yes.
Okay, so you do have them available.
We do have those available, yes.
So if you had to do a tabletop exercise, calculating the capacity of those pipes down to Banbury Way, that would be something that's well within your reach at this point.
That is within our capabilities, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brosman, do you have any redirect?
Not at this time.
Okay. You want to call your next witness?
Sure, Mike Wagner. No. Yeah, I think that's what I put in here. Could you give us a moment, please?
What is that, your first? I'm looking at the pages. Right. So you remember, so I thought maybe that was like your first book before in the third or fourth grade or something. Gets to me at the end of it. Really?
Should we wait for John to come back?
No.
Okay. Mike, you've been sworn. Can you describe your educational and professional background?
Yes, I have an associate degree in horticulture and landscape design from Temple University. I have a bachelor's of science in landscape architecture from Temple University. I have 28 years in the nursery industry, growing, digging, and maintaining plant material. And I have 16 years in a professional office as a landscape architect.
And your professional qualifications are included in our exhibit package at A7?
Yes, that is my CV. Actually, it's my resume.
And I would like to offer Mike as an expert in landscape architecture. Mike, are you familiar with the property at 115 Strafford Avenue?
Yes, I am. I've had 4 visits out there.
And are some of those visits with some of the neighbors that we had made an agreement with?
Yes, I had a meeting out there with Bo and several of the neighbors to go over the existing landscape plan that was done. And upon that meeting, we then revised the landscape plan per their recommendations and their requests.
Okay. And have you examined the condition of the existing trees on the property?
Yes, I was contracted by the LLC to go out and do a tree survey of the existing trees that were marked for removal. And in the process, we pretty much did a tree survey of the whole property.
And at Exhibit A8 in our package that I've given the board, is this a copy of the summary of the analysis you did of those trees?
Yes, it is a detailed summary of all the trees that I located. The existing trees, some of the larger existing trees already had some blue identification tags, probably from an existing survey. We use that as a reference.
So the tags that were out on the site placed by someone else are referenced in this report?
Exactly. You can go out there and look at the tree itself and then reference the report to get the quality, condition, and also species.
Now, is it your understanding that as part of the land development process, any applicant such as the applicant here has to go to the Shade Tree Commission and meet various township tree replacement formulas?
It's my understanding most townships do have a shade tree a commission that you need to go to, yes.
And we're going to be going through that process?
Yes, we are.
Now, notwithstanding that, I want to just get into a little bit about the trees that are there and what we're going to do for landscaping. Now, according to township ordinances, they have something called a heritage tree. It's my understanding those are the most important trees. They're trees with a caliper of 36 inches or greater. Is that your understanding?
True.
And do we have some heritage trees here that meet that size requirement that we're proposing for removal?
Yes, we located 8 heritage trees. 6 of them are to be removed, which are in poor condition, and 2 are going to remain. One being a large ginkgo at the front of the property along Strafford Avenue, and one along the existing eastern hedgerow.
And your report at A8, that summarizes it, but maybe you could briefly describe, what's the, you said that some of them were in poor condition. Can you briefly describe that?
Yes, upon further review and observation, we were able to take actually photographs of the existing trees that were out there and use them and actually use the photographs to identify some of the issues. The first one, which I'll show, is actually tree number 89, which is on the corner of Stratford Avenue and the northern property line. And that is a Norway maple, and as you can see, the top is pretty much died out of it, which is a direct indication that the tree is in rapid decline. That knows the fact that there's also a lot of scarring, too, where the old branching network was.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
a Norway maple? Can you comment on that species and if it's I don't know if desirable would be the right word, but a desirable species?
50 years ago it was, because of the way the tree grew and how hardy it was, but lately it has been classified as an invasive species because of the amount of sucker or amount of seedlings that it will rapidly grow from all of the samaras that actually fall into the ground. There are ordinances or actually townships that will not let you plant a Norway maple, and they actually ask you to remove them.
Okay. And I don't think you have to go through every tree unless there's interest from the board, but generally what you've described, is that indicative of the condition of the trees that we would be removed?
Yes, this picture right here is a picture of the property line between the commercial development and our lot. And as you can see along these right-hand sides, just in the picture alone, you can see large scarring on the trunks. You can see also snapped off branches and also some additional scarring at the base of the plant material. I have additional pictures in the package that show per tree issues with the trees coming from large broken branches, large scar areas, large crevice areas that have rotted out, large scarring on the tree trunks themselves, which make them hazards, large holes and gaps, which now breed decay. And this happens on the majority of all the trees along the northern property line, including the neighbors' trees that are adjacent to our property.
Now, just for the record, we've put in as Exhibit A9, we're calling it the revised demolition plan. That's a revised version of sheet 4 of the plan set, is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's my understanding that's revised just by tying in the tree numbers that you used in your report
Yes,
to show those same tree numbers on this plan?
yes. It was also used to identify trees that the neighbors asked us to remove also. A, because of hazard, or B, because they were an invasive species that they did not want along the property line.
Give me a moment.
Good question.
I'm going to put up here the current landscaping plan that we have on file. It's sheet 9 of the set. Did you assist in preparing this?
Yes, I did initially. This was the first go-around when we had gotten remarks back from the township. We have revised this plan per the meeting with the residents. We've minimized a material within this open space to make it more open per one of the requests from the neighbors.
Can we just, let's identify some dates on these plans?
Okay?
Is this the same sheet 9 it's with A1?
Yes,
Okay,
just the bigger version.
okay. Go ahead.
Mike, maybe you can, with the understanding that this is going to change based on the feedback you got from the neighbors, can you just kind of, maybe starting from Strafford Avenue and working your way back, describe the landscaping plan that we've come up with for the site?
Well, this plan is different from the plan that we are going forward with. This was the plan, original plan that was done, a revised plan. I think the neighbors do have that now. But what we've done is we've added additional street trees along Strafford Avenue, which were not there, to fulfill that requirement, which then gives an additional buffer between Strafford Avenue and the new units that are going in. Along the northern property line, we were able to determine that we were able to put larger shade trees in now because of lack of curbing going in on the driveway, and then also the additional green space between our property line and the existing curb line that's already there. As we move our way back to the eastern area, after talking with the neighbors, especially Leslie Morgan and also Nissan, they weren't interested in having a large green wall of evergreens there. They both were very interested in having more of a dappled light, being able the light able to come through and not a solid wall. So the plant material we chose, be it evergreen, we were also a smaller variety. So it was more of an American arborvitae, if you're familiar with that. Grows about 15 to 18 feet tall instead of 60 to 80 feet, as say a spruce would. So the idea was to give them a very limited screen in some locations, knowing that the backdrop for that was an existing white pine screen hedge that's already existing that's 35 to 40 feet tall. We would then underplant that and then also fulfill additional obligations in front of that to make it more attractive.
Can I just stop for a minute? You're talking about the western boundary?
Eastern boundary?
Eastern between the stormwater and the property boundary.
Exactly.
And your testimony is that this sheet 9, that there's another sheet 9 this has been revised.
Yes, it
There's
has, but it hasn't been
additional
submitted.
planning that hasn't been submitted to the township yet, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so more evergreens. You're running through this real quick. I want to make
Okay.
sure the record's clear. So there's another sheet 9 with additional planning over and beyond what's shown on sheet 9.
Revised planning of
Okay.
what's shown on sheet 9, yes.
Okay.
It may not be additional, it may actually be less.
It's
Did I
less,
hear you?
it's less
Okay.
material, but we fulfilled the requirements of the ordinance with our charting.
Okay, less material, but
Better
different
placement.
from what's shown on it.
Exactly, better placement, more for what the residents requested.
Okay, go ahead, George.
Okay, and then along the southern property line, we pretty much stay with the material that was there, just trying to give an additional buffer between the existing bank and also the enterprise, because this is the back end of the units. This screen itself will be anywhere from 15 to 18 feet tall. In some locations, it might be 25 feet, depending on the plant material that is going in. We have some existing buffering already on the corner of some large mature pin oaks that are on the bank property, which we're going to use to supplement as some additional screening. We'll underplant them and then fill along the buffers to give a nice solid screen. The idea wasn't to do a solid row of pine trees. It was to give it some aesthetical appeal, add some flowering trees and shrubs within that buffer, so the residents, not only the residents, but also the neighbors and around, will have an attractive site to look at. The ordinance stated that it was more about evergreening the edges than it was about giving views in and out. And that was my interpretation of the ordinance and then reading the requirements for it. So we've taken the ordinance and we've worked it, so we've come up with a very aesthetically pleasing plan, not only for the homes themselves and the residents, but also for the surrounding neighbors.
And now you mentioned there'll be a new plan that we'll be submitting probably as part of the land development that have been reviewed by the neighbors. And I don't know if you have the numbers, or the numbers are detailed on this sheet, but roughly, is there a significant number of new trees that are going to be planted here?
We're planning a total of about 176 new trees, 2.5 to 3 inch caliber. Now there's a combination of also some flowering trees and some evergreens within that. And then additionally, above and beyond that, I think we have an additional 300 and some odd shrubs above and beyond any requirement that we are adding to the development.
Now, given the quality and condition of the existing trees and the existing landscaping or lack thereof, for instance, in the existing parking lot and along Strafford Avenue, in your opinion, will the proposed landscaping plan be a substantial improvement over that which is currently on the property?
Yes, it will.
That's all I have for Mike.
Let me get the numbers right. On sheet 9, it says total replacement trees 86,
This is wrong.
right?
Yes, this calculation chart is the old chart. The new landscape plan will show 44 tree replacement trees, but a total of 95 replaced.
So that may be.
I thought I heard 176.
Is this, Mike, just for the
Total
ordinance?
trees, total everything, above and beyond the replacement trees. That would be buffer trees, street trees, lot trees, building square footage trees.
And shrubs in there.
No, shrubs are totally different.
All right, so you're planting 176 new trees.
Yes,
Some are going to stay, so you're not counting them in the 176.
no,
And how many additional new shrubs?
a little over 300, 306.
Okay. But we don't have that plan in front of us.
No,
but
we do not.
They're the numbers.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Wagner?
Well, I just have a quick clarification question. You have not been in front of Shade Tree.
No, with the 25th
Okay.
of September.
So there hasn't been a township verification of the replacement formula and what trees are truly hazardous and whatnot.
Exactly, because we wanted to go the shade tree first in case we had to revise again.
Okay. Could you give your opinion about how close to a 4-foot underground system you could plant trees?
Depending on the tree, if it's a willow tree, I would not plant it within close proximity of it. We are not planting willow trees. The plant material that would be going in close proximity would be the American arb, it'd be dogwoods, redbuds, and then a possibility of some oaks, but they're further out. Standard is from, if it's a 20-foot sewer easement, you always plant on the outside of the easement for that. The material that's going in, I do not foresee an issue with it getting into the underground system.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members have any questions?
I was wondering, the pine trees that are to remain, did you assess the health of those?
Yes, I did. The white pines that are out there, be it a weak-wooded plant, the plant material is still in very good shape. There is one plant that is intertwined with a mulberry which will be removed, and that's part of the demolition plan to free it up so it can grow and get a better shape to it. Ideally, when the tree removal goes in, an arborist will actually have to go in and probably do some selective pruning on all the material to remain, i.e. largely the material along the eastern property line that faces the neighbors. There's some dead material that will need to be removed, more as a safety issue. There is one tree, I will say, along that property line that the neighbors have asked to be removed because of some of the existing damage that was done to a garage because of the decline in the tree. That tree itself will be removed, and it's on the list.
Mr. Radnor, I just wanted to get a little more detail on my prior question to Mr. Dobson. I think if you would look at A5, it shows fairly well a little better than this because there's so many new trees going in. The trees, the existing white pines that you mentioned are shown in sort of a bluish color on that plan, correct?
Yes.
And how do you protect, first of all, let me suggest that perhaps the canopy of those trees is a bit understated, is it not?
On this, yes.
So that the tree branches actually would extend, for example, on the southernmost tree over the patio area adjacent to Unit 3. Fair statement?
It's a possibility. I would have to have a scale to actually see. The diameter of the canopy of that tree was roughly 40 feet, meaning the trunk was 18 inches. So you're looking at roughly 20 on 20 on each side. It wasn't a perfectly symmetrical tree.
Gotcha. My question, though, is what specific measures are proposed, given that this particular tree and a couple of the others are very close to the patio areas? There would have to be some earth disturbance, at least slightly beyond the patio areas, I would think. How can we assure that they will be preserved and healthy?
Standard practice is to minimize disturbance within the drip line of the tree. There are some trees which you can disturb with underneath their drip line, but again, it depends on the species. White pines will take some disturbance underneath. Standard nursery practice, or the American Associated Nursery, pretty much asks that you do not disturb with underneath the drip line for precautionary reasons.
Okay. And as to these, they are white pine trees, correct?
Yes, sir.
How sensitive are they to any kind of disturbance under the drip line?
Minimal disturbance. We're not looking at, say, maybe a Japanese maple or, say, like a pin oak of some sort, where they don't like a lot of disturbance. Above and beyond that, they are in an open field. They will get some disturbance, but with the tree protection detail and the location of it, I don't think there should be an issue with that.
Okay. Can you express your level of assurance and confidence that these measures will, in fact, preserve those 6 trees?
I could say that as long as the tree protection fencing is put in the right location, that there should not be an issue. But then again, it is a living thing, and anything can happen.
Okay. Are there any mitigating factors in your plan if any one or more of those trees do not survive?
At this point, no.
Okay, but you would be willing to consider such mitigating factors?
Yes, and as a caveat, since we do not have the revised landscape plan, what I have done in close proximity to the drip line is to add additional white pines in mass groupings, 3 to 4 footers, 5 footers, to beef up the additional screen as some of the lower branches start to fall off. So basically what we're doing is just reestablishing an additional white pine hedge. So what's there now eventually will be filled in front with some additional smaller material.
Very well. Thank you. That's all I have.
Questions from Township staff?
Yes, I do. I actually have 2 questions, one for this witness and one for Mr. Dobson, if I can address that.
Too late for Mr. Dobson. Just stay on this witness for now.
Mr. Wagner, you had mentioned that the Norway maples were an invasive tree. I'm not taking issue with that, but in your opinion, do they still contribute to the environment and stormwater management through the uptake of water?
Yes.
So removing those trees will have an impact to the amount of stormwater management that is being handled on the site?
If we remove them all, yes, they would. But we are replacing.
And the replacement trees, have you done a calculation as to what the impact that the new replacement trees would have versus the existing trees?
No, we have not.
Thank you.
Mr. Norsini.
Hi. Yes, I think it was Mr. Brosman who noted that the heritage trees were 36 inches. Is that correct? I have some concern because our current ordinance, a heritage tree is 30 inches. But there's also a change in compensatory plantings that go along with that. So when you go before shade tree or subdivision land development, you should be prepared. The compensatory plantings for the removal of a 30-inch shade tree are 6, and it outlines that. So I just want you to be aware of that, because the amount of trees you quoted may or may not be what is required based on the current ordinance. I also have another question. I guess this is for Mr. Brosman. I have in my notes, in a letter dated June 14th from the Township solicitor, it was noted that Mr. Luther, the current owner, not the equitable owner, but the current owner of the property, improperly removed trees in a fine pursuant to Section 26311 of the Shade Tree Ordinance. $7,000 is owed to the Township to go to the Commemorative Shade Tree Fund. I would like to request that that become a condition of this proceeding, and maybe
Well-
Mr. Brosman can inform us on that item.
Let me just, Mr. Norsini, do you have copies of the letter you want to submit?
I do.
Well, let's wait till we're done with this witness, and then you can offer that. Mr. Brosman can take a look at it, and then if he has an objection, he can raise an objection at that point. But let's get beyond this witness. Any questions about this witness's testimony?
Nothing further, sir.
Okay, so board, Mr. Higgins, you have another question?
Yes, I do. I'm struck by the, I guess it's Exhibit E8, the listing of all the tree species.
Yes.
And you're finding these trees all expendable, all no longer of any value. And you're saying, take them all down.
Not all of them, just the
Well,
ones along the northern property.
Okay, not all, you're right. But how many, 19 are recommended for taking down?
Yes, 19R.
And you're replacing them with a huge number of trees, overall number is 176, but I think what you've said is that the caliper, average caliper on all those replacement trees is just 2.5 to 3 inches.
Per the ordinance.
In contrast with 36 inches, 36 inches, 30, 42, 36, 36. Is there some scheme or formula at work here that you just want to get rid of these 19 trees and because they're in the way or they don't suit some other
No.
criterion for the property?
The ones along the northern property are hazard. They are in decline. So as a quality tree,
19 of them.
not 19 of them. Some of the other trees, like the ailanthus and the mulberry, they are invasive. Well, ailanthus is an invasive species. It's not from here. And the trees that we're talking about aesthetically don't fit into the development that they're trying to develop. Plus, some of the trees along the eastern property that are removed, like the black locust and ailanthus, I was asked by the neighbors to have them removed. The ones along the southern area that we're removing, like the sassafras, which is a dead tree, which is dead now, needs to come down because it's a hazard. The walnut and, say, the mulberry along the property line next to the bank, they have been lopped off years ago, and they've suckered out, and they're now growing into each other. So technically, the tree's not a healthy specimen, and that's what we try to promote: healthy growing trees.
And which species do not fit in aesthetically with the project? And
The
where
mulberries.
Where are they located?
The mulberries, the majority of them are down along the northern area by the lowest spot, and then also within the property along the eastern area. And these are bird dispersed trees that have
what
just
kind? I'm sorry.
bird dispersed,
Bird dispersed.
meaning a bird came in, ate the seed, flew, and then as it was flying, it excreted the seed as it was flying, and it just grew up. That tree is not a specimen quality tree that you would want to put in development because of how dirty the tree is.
Yeah, I agree. Mulberries are not friendly trees.
If it was in a naturalized area or we were trying to restore a forested or a hedgerow area for wildlife, then I would consider that, but not in a development of this caliber.
It just seems a little bit odd to me that all these trees are coming down because they're unsafe or they don't look good. And the result is that we're getting trees that are extremely small in comparison.
Any further questions for this witness? Okay. Mr. Brosman? You have another witness?
Andy Heinrich. Okay, yeah, I know. That's what got me in trouble.
Yeah. Let's take about a 2-minute break.
Sure.
We'll take 5. Okay, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we'll pick up with Mr. Heinrich. Okay, we're going to pick up with the next witness, Mr. Brosman.
Andy Heinrich is going to be our next witness. He's already been sworn in. Andy, can you describe your educational and professional background briefly?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering degree from Drexel University. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm certified as a professional traffic operations engineer, and I've been practicing specific to traffic engineering and transportation planning for over 35 years.
And in the package I've handed out at A10, is this a summary of your qualifications?
Yes.
And I would offer Andy as an expert in traffic engineering.
Okay, he'll be accepted.
Andy, are you familiar with the proposal to redevelop the property at 115 Strafford Avenue with 11 townhome units?
Yes.
And did you analyze the traffic generation characteristics involved in redeveloping the property from the previously approved bar and restaurant use to the current plan that proposes 11 dwelling units?
Yes.
And what we have at Exhibit A11, is this an update of an earlier letter report you had done for the zoning hearing board?
Yes, it is.
And what element of it did you update?
The previous version of the report assumed only 10 dwellings on the property. This has been updated for 11 units.
And can you basically describe what you did regarding those two scenarios that I gave you, the approved bar and restaurant and the approved or the proposed 11 dwelling units? Describe what you did and describe the traffic generation characteristics of each.
Sure. Traffic engineers and municipalities, for that matter, rely on a document published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and it's entitled Trip Generation Manual. It's currently in its 9th edition since that was published in 2012. That document is a database, if you will, of all kinds of land uses, and from the different statistical equations and databases within that report, we can make an estimate on the amount of traffic for different kind of land uses, knowing the size and character of those land uses.
And what were your findings with regard to the bar and restaurant that has approval here and the proposed 11 dwelling units?
Well, we don't have a tenant for the restaurant, so we're providing a comparison of two different kinds of restaurants, either a quality restaurant or a high turnover sit-down restaurant. But giving you just a range of values, renovating the existing building to accommodate either a quality restaurant or a high turnover sit-down restaurant, you can be expected to have traffic generation of a range of 1,350 trips per day to 1,900 trips per day. That's a total inbound and outbound traffic flow. Again, not knowing the type of restaurants, we've kind of assumed that the type of restaurant that might go in here would not be offering breakfast, so consequently, traffic generation during the morning peak hour would be very low. Employees or deliveries, that kind of traffic. But even for that, the range of traffic might be in a range of 12 to 17 trips per hour during the morning peak hour. More important, in the weekday afternoon peak hour, we estimate that reuse of the building for a restaurant could generate traffic in the range of 112 trips per hour to 148 trips per hour. And then on a Saturday, during its peak use time period, we estimate a range of 162 trips to 211 trips per hour for a restaurant use of the site.
And how does that compare to 11 townhomes?
That trip generation is significantly higher than 11 townhomes would generate. 11 townhomes will generate less than 100 trips per day. And during those 3 peak hours, the weekday morning, weekday afternoon, and Saturday midday peak hours, you could expect to have 9 or 10 trips per hour generated by 11 townhouses.
Now, in your opinion, will the change of the site, the proposed redevelopment of the property with 11 residential dwelling units, cause any detrimental traffic impacts when compared to the traffic that could be expected from the already approved bar and restaurant use?
There's, as I indicated, a significant drop or reduction in the amount of traffic that would be generated from the site with 11 townhouses versus the restaurant reuse of the site.
That's all I have for Andy.
Board have any questions? No? Township? Mr. Crawford? No questions. Okay. You have any other witnesses?
I was going to call Chuck Dobson back to try to address that question that had come up regarding the underground stormwater facility.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Dobson, you're still under oath. So. Kevin has a question.
I have it. Can you put out the, I guess it's the proposed site plan that you had out before? I guess that's for the record, that's sheet 5 of the Exhibit C to the conditional use application, which was A1 and B1. Chuck, when you were here before, you were asked to calculate the, if you removed the underground basin that's shown on this plan, which we don't believe should be removed, but assuming it would be removed, what would that do to the percent of open space that we're proposing?
It would reduce the provided open space from 18% to 16%.
Now, did you also, when I asked you before about the practical area that's available here, did you have a chance to calculate both the open space area and those buffer areas we spoke about?
I did. The open space as provided on the plan is 18% of the tract area. If you include the additional buffers, that percentage goes up to 30%. And so just this rear area, effectively, you're taking almost a third of the site, which is, it's actually the best portions of the site, the most open and the most usable, at least for development purposes, and they're actually setting that aside. And I think also that when you take into account that under the density modification development, you're allowed to have building coverage that'll get up to 35%, and the building coverage here is only 16%. And the way it's laid out, you actually have open space, although it's not qualifying open space, meandering in and throughout the units themselves, as I had previously testified to. So removal of the underground facility would still allow us, as it's shown in the plan, to qualify with the minimum 15% open space criteria set forth in the ordinance.
Now, I think you stated this, but just to be clear for the record, there'd be certain contouring of the land that would be done that's shown on this plan?
Yes, it would be different than what's shown on this plan, but the concept would be to provide the landscaping in as well as berming, which is also spoken about in the township's ordinance, to create a kind of a holistic effect of more of a naturalized area.
And and you're going to reduce it, you said, based on neighbors, meetings with the neighbors, but is it your testimony, or what is your testimony, again, as to the usability of those areas that you're contouring?
Well, I still think the area is usable. I think in light of the request from the neighbors to reduce that berming, I think it's even more so. The slopes that are shown on this current plan are 4 to 1 or so. You can still walk them, but when we reduce it down to the height of 2 feet or so, as requested by the neighbors, effectively all the property is going to be accessible and it's going to be very naturalized.
That's all I have for Chuck.
Just clarify, when you did recalculated the qualifying open space, it was just that rectangle, right? You didn't include the land between the buildings?
That's correct. It was just, we reduced that, we deducted that rectangle out of the equation. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And all the qualifying open spaces in one spot in the rectangle next to the stormwater?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to revisit the density issue for the by right zoning. You had mentioned earlier that it was 6.2 units per acre in the R4, which equates to the 7,000 square foot lots.
Yes, sir.
And that does not include any of the required right-of-way which would be required to provide access to those lots, does it?
It does not.
Nor any inefficiencies in lotting out a by right plan in the R4 district?
No, as Mr. Brosman indicated, it was a mathematical exercise.
You could then, if you were to take those things into consideration, look at a by right density, not at the 6.2, but more 4.6 taken into consideration, right-of-way and lot inefficiencies due to configuration of the lots. Have you looked at that calculation?
I don't understand.
Taking into the consideration of the right-of-way required to provide access to those lots and inefficiencies, the density would not be 6.2, but would be something more like 4.6 acres.
I object. We don't have anything
So-
to form a basis of that
Yeah,
percent he's
unless you have a
giving.
plan over there, Mr. Kachansky, that shows that. But the question is, a normal site drawing is, you usually take 20%,
Not, well, it's
more or
a,
less off of a blank piece of paper when you're doing a development for inefficiencies.
mathematically, looking at the lot width times half of the right-of-way
Right,
at 10% is 4.6 units per acre.
okay. So that's your opinion,
Yes.
okay.
Question.
Mr. Norsini, you have another question?
I do
this
for
witness?
Mr. Dobson, I'm sorry. Mr. Dobson, we were talking earlier about being able to quantify how much you have exceeded the stormwater ordinance, and I fully understand that. And I guess my question is, this is somewhat, although be it good, an unintended consequence, meaning you followed the ordinance, and when you followed the ordinance to the letter of the law, and you ran your calculations, that you determined we did better than we had to. We exceeded what was required.
Yes.
Okay. So that if, as we go through the land development process, if impervious surface changes, let's say that the way you've exceeded that right now, we'll call it X. If impervious surface changes, i.e. gets greater, as time goes on, that could be 0.9X or 0.8X or something like that. That could reduce. Conceivably.
It could. I think if the overall question is, do we exceed the ordinance requirements, the answer is yes.
I
If
understand.
we looked at strictly the ordinance requirements as they are now, the need for stormwater would actually be negligible if non-existent, strictly based on the ordinance.
And on your interpretation,
Yes, sir.
correct? Not after going through research. Okay, just wanted to make it known that although you may have exceeded the ordinance, it's not an intent, you didn't decide that you were going to go over by a certain amount. It's just the way it worked out.
I was requested specifically by my client to design a stormwater management system that would have a drastic effect on the regional problem of periodic flooding in the area. And through the calculations that I submitted to the township, I did that. I think when you're talking about stormwater management, there's a variety of assumptions that you talked about. And if your question earlier was, would you consider not allowing for impervious, but maybe taking it back to meadow? What I would offer as a counter to that request is that in the post-developed condition, I modeled this as either impervious or grass. One of the things I did not take into account was the extensive landscaping that's going to be installed here as well, which over time is effectively going to change the cover condition to be something that's going to be a lot less, it'll generate a lot less stormwater runoff than just simply a lawn condition. So there are numerous levels of conservatism in this calculation, and if through the portion of going through land development, if it's decided that we need to take one or more other assumptions into account as well, then we'll do as directed.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Brosman, any other witnesses?
I have none. I would ask to move my exhibits into the record.
Okay, they will be accepted. Mr. Crawford, do you have any witnesses or anything you want to add?
Yes.
Okay.
That's okay. I go by a few names. Hello. My name is Leslie Morgan. Do I need to be sworn in?
Yeah, you need to be sworn in.
Leslie Morgan? Yes. Yes. I think what I'll just need, I may. Can you just on the side? I'd like this right up.
Leslie, first identify where you are in respect to this property, and then proceed with your testimony.
Okay, thank you. I live. Hello. Hi, I live right here at 12 Farm Road. It is entitled Henry T. and Helen S. Bryant, but they've been dead for over a decade. We started this with not real positive spirit, and when we first visited you, I think it was maybe 3 months ago, in front of the BOC, and April, so a long time ago. We feel we've come a long way. I personally did not want townhouses, but in fact, Madam Chairperson, you suggested that you would like to see some up in our area. So we had to accept that and move along the zoning process and the planning process. Over time, our neighborhood met with the applicant and his lawyer many times, and we retained our own counsel and an engineer as well. And we feel that we have developed a beyond code compliant density modification plan that meets all criteria and then some. Something that we're most happy about was the coming together of the open space with the buffers. And looking back at some of your other density modification plans is how we modeled it. But we thought we'd maybe in this small tract be able to improve upon that even. And joining the buffers with your open space creates even more meaningful open space, which is what the Planning Commission directed us to do, because when it was scattered, it was meaningless, they said. And I agreed, and so did my neighborhood. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm just giving testimony. So at the end, Mr. Erickson has come up with a 20% increase. This was before you asked to take out the stormwater inlet trap with your calculations. But it is a 20% increase over the requirements of for common open space. And as I liken it to, we're creating a jewel box. And so, Mr. Rice, when you say who's going to see it, who's going to care, we're going to care deeply because we're creating an over landscape situation in a way. So what I call is a jewel box. We only have so much ground to work with, but we're creating like a jewel box. And I know that all of our neighbors are going to enjoy it. I think that all these people will enjoy it, and I think will actually increase your selling price. I think it's a huge selling point. So that's one thing I want to say, that you've exceeded our expectations. We appreciate that. We know that we'll work with you as we move forward. The view shed on Lancaster, right now we have a one parcel that's fully developed. So if that would, somebody asked me at the Planning Commission, if it ever came into play, what would happen? Well, we would hope that we wouldn't be back here asking to maintain the zoning codes because it is maxed out on the impervious to grounds coverage. So we're hoping that that would keep unless they could pierce the zoning codes. So that it would be a straight line. It's developed for using the best part of the ground, and 27,000 cars get to enjoy it a day for free. We're very proud of that.
Leslie, if you could be a little more specific about the exact location of that open space corridor.
Okay,
and
so
the property on which it is situated.
yes, right now you have a Citizens Bank branch, which is highly successful within their deposit retail organization. It has something like $80 million of deposits. That's considered very successful. So it's obviously a good purpose for that, but in case somebody want to buy that, it's not for sale, but if in fact it could be, I looked at the codes, and I believe this is maxed out on the zoning codes of Radnor, meaning they would have to come in front of the board and say, Jesus, it's just horrible as a bank branch, and we need to scrape the whole thing and make it all cement and build on it. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's realistic. I think that we're lucky it was placed there. This is one parcel. And it's lucky it's here, and it aligned with this, so that we could create a whole alleyway, if you will, of 27,000 cars and a sidewalk here, too. We have a sidewalk here. And the farmer's market's right over there, so you get a lot of walking that can enjoy that.
Just so the record is clear if someone reads it later, this area of rather open green area among the bank property is immediately to the south of the proposed open space area on this tract. Is that a fair description?
Yes.
And it's between this open space on the one hand and Lancaster Avenue on its south border, correct?
Yes, Lancaster is just to this, here.
So it's a full corridor of open space from Lancaster Avenue through the open space shown on this plan.
Yes, and actually, if we went further back, it actually connects with Mr. Fuchs's property as well, and it's open back there. It's a really wide and long thing. And my third point is, I think I already went through it. I think we looked at piecemealing the open space and sort of scattering. And I've seen some plans recently where they take little tiny pieces and it's piecemealed. I don't know if that's if that makes an elegant density modification plan. I don't think so. And we try to take the ordinance and make the best of it and make the most in one area, and hoping that Bo was also going to use some other areas to sell his units, and he did. He added more up and throughout. So I think at the end we all won. Oh, the only other thing is, just by history, Ravenscliff, which was mentioned before the meeting started by Steve Norsini, Ravenscliff was a density modification plan. I happened to hear him speaking about it, and I know some of these factoids by heart now. And in terms of trees planted at Ravenscliff, which is 125 acres, and it was density modification, it got common open space. They planted 900 trees on 125 acres. I'm not sure in what design. And it almost scares me that there's going to be 176 trees planted on 2.13. So you have 83 trees per acre on the proposed application. And Ravenscliff, even though it's in a more, I believe it's in R3, or R2, it demands more acreage. They only planted 7.2 trees per acre. Interesting. That's all.
Any questions? Leslie?
Any questions from the board? No, no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Crawford?
Just let me check one moment. Do you want to say anything? No, that's all we have to present. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Mr. Brosman, you're done with your case?
Yes, I'm done with my case.
Okay. Township, Mr. Norsini, do you have something you want to present?
Actually, I have a few items.
You want to come up here and do it, or do you want to do it from there?
I could just do it from here. This is for Mr. Brosman. This is in regards to, per the shade tree ordinance, the current owner of the property removed trees improperly. This gets back to that $7,000 fine, which is still outstanding, and I have copies for Mr. Brosman.
Could you identify, Mr. Norsini, what you're referring to? Is it a letter? Has it got a date on it?
I'm sorry, I had done that the last time. So this is the June 14th letter from the Township Solicitor, John B. Rice, addressed to Mr. Barat Luthra in regards to the 115 Strafford Avenue property, where trees were improperly removed, and pursuant to the Shade Tree Ordinance, Section 263-11, a fine is levied in the amount of $7,000. This letter was dated June 14th, and yet has still not been paid to this date. And I would request that as
Let's mark that as Township Exhibit T1. And if you could give Mr. Brosman a copy and bring a copy up here for the board, we'll mark it as T1. I don't know if Mr. Brosman's seen that letter.
I have not.
I know a little bit about it since I wrote it, but there's a longer story involving it. But that'll be T1. 6/14/13, correct, Mr. Norsini?
That is correct.
Okay.
You get a copy also?
Yeah. There we go. Super. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Norsini, do you have something else you want to present?
I do have additional items.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Dobson had noted that the Planning Commission had mentioned sidewalks on the property, and he said that would be looked at as they go through the land development portion of the project. I would request that, since both Gannett Fleming and Gilmore Associates put that in the review letter, that there should be sidewalks internal to the subdivision as well as on Strafford Avenue, that be required as part of this proceeding.
Do you have the review letters?
I do, sir, and I can get copies for the...
Let's mark them and identify them. Mr. Brosman, you have copies of those letters already, right?
I believe I already have those. And we will agree to put in those sidewalks that Mr. Norsini is mentioning, as a condition to this.
You want them labeled?
Bring them up here,
T2?
please. Yes. Let's just identify them. Okay, Gannett Fleming letter dated August 29th, 2013 will be T2. And Gilmore and Associates letter dated August 29th, 2013 will be T3. Okay, and these are reviews.
Both letters are dated August 29th. The review letters from Gannett Fleming, the township's appointed township engineer, and from Amy Kaminsky of Gilmore Associates, the township's appointed traffic engineer, and both note the requirement for sidewalks. Ms. Kaminsky's letter notes that sidewalks should be interior to the site as well as along Strafford Avenue, and Mr. Phillips notes it at least on Strafford Avenue. And I would request that, again, as part of the condition, sidewalks along Strafford Avenue and in the site would be installed.
Okay, so Mr. Brosman and Mr. Crawford, any objection to T1, T2, and T3 being admitted?
None from me.
Objection? Okay. Mr. Norsini, you have anything else you want to present?
I do, sir.
What was that?
As we spoke, and I would rather not wait until it is subdivision land development, the applicant's civil engineer has done somewhat of the beginning of a survey of the existing storm sewer system that runs along Windsor Avenue and eventually connects.
I just realized something. Have you been sworn in?
No?
Let's swear Mr. Norsini in, please. Now you're testifying.
I do. Okay. So Mr. Dobson stated that the beginning of a survey of the storm sewer along Windsor Avenue has been done. In essence, he has surveyed the different inverts. I would request also, as a condition of this proceeding, that the applicant is required to determine the carrying capacity of the existing storm sewer system as well as its condition. So perhaps with the reduced flows, Mr. Dobson noted, the pipe is sized properly, but if it is not of a good condition to convey that stormwater runoff, that the applicant would be required to either to replace the pipe if it needs to be resized or replaced due to condition.
Can you just, let's identify
I have another exhibit.
what pipe and where, okay. Do you have more than one copy
I
with
do.
you?
One for Mr. Brosman.
Is that going to be T4?
T4.
The pipe in question
Hold
is
on a
the
minute.
red line.
Hold on a minute. Okay. Take one over there and put it on the camera. Okay, we're going to mark looks like a tax parcel map which shows Windsor Avenue, Farm Road, West Lancaster Avenue, and Banbury Way as T4. Okay, Mr. Norsini.
The pipe in question is in the faint red line, and it begins at the inlet Mr. Dobson showed on the plan that the proposed stormwater management system will connect to.
Mr. Norsini, can you slide that? So that, there we go. Keep going. Keep sliding it in that direction. There we go.
So this pipe begins here, at the highest point. I would request that these pipes and inlets to where they connect on Banbury Way with the final inlet that goes into the existing stormwater management system, they be reviewed for condition and/or capacity, and in the event they need to be changed in size or replaced due to the condition of the pipe, that would be required of the applicant.
Why are you recommending that?
Well, as Mr. Dobson noted, this project will discharge into this inlet. And although up to this point, obviously the stormwater from that project does go down through there, we're now going to be having a stormwater management system that's connected directly to this inlet. And I would like to make sure that as much as possible of the flow is kept in those pipes going down to Banbury and Windsor. We have severe flooding down here, and at times we get some severe ponding on Windsor, which may or may not be attributable to the condition of the pipe or inlets.
How often has it flooded? Do you know?
I can provide you with some pictures. Severe rain events I can't quantify. It happened as frequently as recently as just a few weeks ago. And could I provide you with some pictures of that?
Sure. Pictures are always good.
I have copies from Mr. Bruce.
How many pictures do you have, Mr. Norsini?
I will only show you two.
Okay, we'll mark the first one as T5. Why don't you identify what T5 shows?
This shows the intersection of Banbury Way and Windsor Avenue. This is a portion of Windsor Avenue that goes towards Lancaster Avenue. You can't see the other piece.
Do you have a date on this event here?
I do not.
Has it been within the last 2 years?
Yes, sir, it's been within the last 6 months.
Okay, that'll be T5, that photograph of Banbury and Windsor intersection.
I have an additional photograph of the same intersection. This is Windsor Avenue as it approaches Banbury, not the other leg that was just shown. And that also has been within the last 2 years.
Is it the same rain event or a different
No,
one?
this is a different one.
Okay. Anything else? you
No,
wanna
sir.
present?
Well, how does a new pipe fix this situation?
It doesn't. It's just if the applicant is, in my view, as your Public Works Director, if the applicant is connecting a new development into an existing township pipe, it is incumbent on the applicant to make sure that that pipe is able to accommodate the flows from the project, and if it needs upgrading or repair, that should also be the responsibility of the applicant. I'm just showing the net effects of a situation that's down there.
Steve, is this the neighborhood where the residents came into a stormwater meeting and were describing their manholes shooting up?
That's correct, Chairman,
Yeah.
Madam President.
So your concern is with the size and the condition, existing size, existing condition of that pipe? Is that
That is correct.
more or less? Okay.
Well, if they're going to contribute less runoff than's coming off now, how are they contributing to this?
But even that reduced runoff, and I agree with you, Commissioner Spengler, is going to be traveling through our pipes. And I think it's the applicant's job to make sure whatever amount of runoff goes through those pipes is able to be conveyed properly.
But isn't more water being conveyed right now off that property?
Not necessarily through the pipes. Meaning if the pipes are inadequate or of poor condition, when that stormwater tries to go through those pipes and comes to an inlet above a blockage, that could come out on Windsor, because Windsor does pond and show issues of that type further west of this site. So I'm just asking the applicant to review what's there.
No, you're also asking them to, if he reviews what's there, if it's a problem, you're asking them to commit to taking up the road and putting a whole pipe down the whole street.
It may just need cleaning. It could be that the pipe has, over years, become full of sediment.
But
It may
that's-
need nothing.
But that's not what you said. You
Well, no,
said you
it-
want him to commit to,
That is correct.
yeah, an open-ended.
From zero to replacement.
An open-ended thing with,
It's not open-ended. There's a specific amount of pipe, so it can be quantified as to what it would cost to evaluate it from a televising standpoint. And also the tabletop exercise, the applicant's civil engineer will go through.
Yes. Steve, these photographs that you showed, how long has the township been aware of these conditions generally?
Several years, sir, at least.
And within that period, has the township done an assessment of the pipes that you're asking us to assess?
No, we have not.
Never in all that time?
I've been here 2 years, not in that time. I can't comment prior to that.
Are you aware of any information in that regard that was done before you were here?
I am not, but that doesn't mean it wasn't done. I am just unaware of it.
Right. But you, or chances are you would be familiar with it, because I assume you've been looking into this situation?
That is correct. That I'm looking into this situation, but not that an assessment was done.
So you wouldn't have checked to see if an assessment was done before you were here?
We are currently looking at an assessment of the existing underground stormwater management system at Banbury and Francis. That's where we stand at this point in time.
Now, do you dispute that the water coming off our site that would go down through this area will be less than it is today if we do this proposal?
I'm sorry, so you're saying, you want me to agree or disagree with the fact that the flows will be reduced?
Yeah, do you dispute that?
I do not.
And this pipe that you're talking about on your exhibit, what exhibit was that? T4?
Still red pipe.
The red pipe, that has an inlet near the back corner of the property?
Correct. This one here is where they connect,
Right.
or
And
will connect.
that inlet, is our property the only property that puts water into that? Or
No.
are there other properties?
No, there are others.
Like how many?
I have not done a drainage study on that, but I can tell you that the adjacent property does have some amount of runoff to that inlet.
Right. And would it be possible there could even be other properties that contribute water to that area?
Possible.
Now, there's, on your exhibit, there are other inlets shown. Do any of those inlets go into that pipe?
All these inlets are part of that piping system.
Can we put that, get the camera on that? Mr. Norsini, you can probably sit down there if that helps, just so we see what's being pointed to.
These inlets?
Yeah, on T4, there are little red boxes. Those are various inlets that are in that pipe. Is that right?
That is correct.
And as you go down from the property toward Windsor, is more or less water getting into those inlets and thus into the pipe? Is more or less coming from the subject property or from other properties?
I couldn't tell if it was more or less, but are additional properties contributing to the stormwater on Windsor? Yes.
So obviously, as the inlets go along the pipe, all the or many of the properties in the vicinities of those inlets are putting water into there. Is that fair?
That is a fair statement.
And have you gone to any of the other property owners that might be contributing water to the pipe and asked them for similar action?
These are single residents. They're not in for subdivision or land development, no. But just like your civil engineer is going to have to assess the sanitary sewer system for a certain amount, once you come in for subdivision land, once you come in for land development, that's why I'm requesting that of the storm sewer. When a single home connects to the sanitary sewer, they don't have to do a study, your project will.
But are you asserting that, is there anything in your ordinance that would require us to do what you're requesting?
I believe so.
So
I
then why-
believe you're required to detail that your outfall can be accommodated in these pipes.
George, you
Yeah,
Oh,
trying to
I'm
put it
sorry.
up there.
picture off of the
I
camera.
apologize. I was trying to, I didn't realize I was doing that. I was trying to get it to look at it. These inlets, T4, again,
Yes, sir.
like some of the ones along Windsor Avenue, you mentioned that they're single properties. Are you asserting that, for instance, let's just pick one, the inlet on 311 Windsor Avenue, are you asserting that that's the only property that sends water into that inlet?
No, I am not. I'm asserting that these properties may all contribute to that, but they are single-family residences, not in for land development or proposed land development. This property is.
Now, and is it possible that properties beyond the homes on Windsor Avenue would contribute to water going into those inlets?
Yes, it is.
That's all I have.
Can I give you the?
Sure. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Norsini, do you have anything else that you want to present?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Kachansky, is there anything you intend to present?
Yes, I'd like to introduce two review letters, one from the Township Planning Commission and a review of the Zoning Hearing Board application. That's a memo dated July 15th, 2013, and a review letter from the Delaware County Planning Commission dated August 15th, 2013.
Okay, so you have a Planning Commission recommendation to the Zoning Hearing Board?
Yes.
That'll be T7, and then T8 will be the Delaware County Planning Commission review letter, which has a date of August 15th, 2013. Okay, is there anything else about these letters, Mr. Kachansky?
Yes, I'd like to highlight a few things in the different correspondences in the Planning Commission memo from July 15, 2013, in review of the Zoning Hearing Board application.
Well, let's, if you're going to, other than putting these in, let's have you sworn in also. Thank you.
I do. Thank you. The July 15th, 2013 letter from the Township Planning Commission to the Zoning Hearing Board, in essence, recommends approval in a 4-to-1 vote with the condition that the Planning Commission would like to see a reduction in the number of units built and an increase in guest parking, highlighting the reduction in the number of units built.
And then I think the applicant testified that the guest parking was added after this.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
What else?
From the Delaware County Planning Commission review letter, August 15, 2013, a few items of note. That they were noting that the proposed stormwater management area is located in the proposed open space that is on the site, which was discussed earlier. And that the plan does not appear to include sidewalks, which the applicant had indicated that that was something that they were going to add. And that's it.
Okay. You have no further testimony?
No.
Okay. You have any questions, Mr. Brosman? Mr. Kachansky?
Yes. Kevin, with regard to the Planning Commission recommendation that you just submitted, they made a subsequent recommendation on this plan, which was my Exhibit A2. Had you seen that? September 3rd.
Just the report of the vote, Kevin. 6-2 in favor.
Do you want to grab that?
Yes, that was of the conditional use application that was just recently in front of them.
And that doesn't indicate that they were recommending at that point to reduce the density, correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the county review letter T8, the last, what copy do you have? I have a copy. Is page 6 the last page? So
Yes.
that doesn't get signed. The cover letter gets signed. I see. So that's more like a memo. Can you read the last paragraph on page 6, compliance?
Aside from the requested granted variances, the plan appears to comply with the Township zoning ordinance and the Township subdivision land development ordinance.
That's all I have.
Board have any questions for Mr. Jansky? No. Okay. Anything else from the Township? Mr. Brosman, anything else?
I think that completes our case. You know, we're eager for a vote on this application. I don't know what the board was planning.
Not going to happen tonight.
Okay.
The board's got 45 days to, unless the board thinks they're ready, and I don't think they are. Board has 45 days from tonight to render a decision. Has to render a written decision within 45 days. So I would anticipate that sometime in October, at one of your regularly scheduled meetings, this would be on the agenda for a vote. And then a written decision would issue. Mr. Crawford?
Question, if I might. Given that there are two members of the board who are unable to attend tonight, is it the custom to allow those members to read the transcript and vote, or just those who are present at the hearing?
They all vote. Well, let's, there is no custom at this point, but why don't we can talk about establishing a custom. Do any of the parties have an objection to having the two absent members, Mr. Higgins and Mr. Fisher, vote on this application if they read the exhibits, read the transcripts? Is there any objection to that happening?
From our standpoint, we have no objection. I think Mr. Brosman would have to speak for himself on this.
We don't object to that.
Okay. Okay. So I think that that's something that the board's going to have to discuss, and those two board members are going to have to feel comfortable making a decision on this. Can't decide that tonight. I mean, I've
Understood.
seen it done many, many times. Usually when there's multiple nights of testimony and you only miss one. But when you miss the only night of testimony, it's a little different in my mind. Okay, anything else from any of the parties? Okay. We said at the outset that after the testimony, there'd be time for public comment. I guess now's the time for public comment. So come on forward, state your name, address, and if you have public comment on the application, pro, con, or neutral.
My name is John Fuchs. I'm a partner in the Strafford office buildings. F as in Frank, U, C, H, S as in Sam. Partner in the Strafford office buildings. We're the property to the north of this development that's before you tonight.
You're adjacent to the proposed private drive that would come in, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Go ahead, Mr. Fuchs.
I'm just disappointed because that driveway takes down so many heritage trees. And even though there's been testimony tonight that they are in decline, by putting the driveway where the trees used to be, there's no opportunity to replant them and have trees of that stature grow there again. And since the one of the main objectives of the density modification ordinance is to protect, hold on. Is to preserve trees, to encourage land development which preserves trees and natural topography. Just the first sentence there. I think that big oak trees like that should be, if not preserved, replanted in a way that they could grow big again. And I just have a little bit of a problem with the density of 11 townhomes there. I think just because the density shall be a maximum of 5.5 units per acre does not mean that it's that it has to be that way. And I think with a few less units, there'd be a little more room along my property line to do some better planting, rather than the 5 feet that's left along that driveway, or approximately 5 feet. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, just one, Mr. Brosman, you were going to submit a copy of that R4 plan.
Yes.
You'll submit that to the, direct it to me, and I'll see that the board gets copies of that.
Okay.
It was discussed earlier. Okay, is there anything else from the board at this point? Okay, then I think that'll adjourn the hearing. The board will, yeah, the board will render its decision within 45 days, and will notify the applicant when this will be on the agenda for a vote.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.